Mark Selby, how you doing, sir?
Excellent, sir. Another week of nickel.
Another week of nickel for sure. How'd you get on with your 3 days of presenting last week? All good?
Oh, no, it was great. Did 30 one-on-one meetings. So there's lots of interest in nickel and lots of people who are, pretty keen on the project and like to see a new nickel story. So yeah, no, it was an excellent 3 days.
Yeah. I think people are getting excited about it again. We were talking to the Reuters senior metals correspondent last week. He's big into his nickel and copper. He's getting very excited about the thematic there. All good news.
No.
I was going to say, we should probably just get the mandatories out of the way. You need to understand what is going on with nickel this week. Is it still around $7?
Yeah, it is. It came off. Some of the viewers might have noticed that there's this COVID pandemic that's still going on, and there is a U.S. election that happened early this week. So, last week, basically, everything sold off as copper prices, nickel prices, everything with the risk-off trade, with the COVID shutdowns, kicking back into gear. U.S. elections around that. People don't like uncertainty and want to sort of walk away and wait to see what happens. So, that happened pre-election. Nickel prices are back up a little bit over $7 a pound today. Copper prices are up a little bit. So, we'll see what happens from here. The thing that was interesting is sort of during all this noise, there was some good fundamental information that came through. So, again, base metals demand is very well correlated with industrial production, and the purchasing manager indexes that each country does, is a view on what industrial production, what is going to be. So, all the numbers for October came out, and, we're all quite good, in terms of US, Europe. And, unfortunately, most of those were, pre-closure, pre-shutdown type analyses. So, we'll see what November looks like. They'll probably be messy again. But, at least, we can see that, once the shutdowns do subside, these economies can rebound. So, I think, that is as someone who's generally glass half full, that's a good sign. So again, once we get through this next series of lockdowns, we should be able to see the economies pick up again.
Okay, so you mentioned the US elections there, and we all know, the whole world knows what's going on there because it's actually still not decided. So you talk about certainty in the marketplace, but it's so close. It's likely to be some uncertainty for some time to come. Do you think companies are positioning themselves for a win either way, or will it not really matter? It's just a case of just give us some certainty.
Yeah, no, I think, it didn't swing all Biden's way. You didn't have a Democratic wave. So, those, that group of investors that would have saw that and panicked, that hasn't happened. We're going to get back into a place with the House, likely in the Democrats' hands, the Senate in the Republican hands, a little closer than last time. And then, the presidency, we'll see whether it ends up being Donald Trump, or Joe Biden. Again, I think the fact that neither one of them want a clear mandate is going to allow them to sort of beat their chests and maybe veer too far off from the paths that they were already on. So I think that's why we've seen the market already kind of respond, is that, okay, it wasn't this big surprise one way or the other, or a big shift one way or the other. And then, the other thing that was happening is, you saw stores in New York City boarding up the windows and so forth, because there was some concern, that the anarchic elements that Mr. Trump responds, gets ramped up, might cause some havoc. And that hasn't happened. They're protesting outside some vote counting centers, but there hasn't been any sort of civil unrest at this point in time. So again, with those kind of sort of extreme things out of the way, that's allowed people to step back into the market.
Okay, so for people new to investing, and perhaps, this may be their first election that they've come across whilst investing. So just early to this thing. This certainty component is really important. Okay, people want to know what the world's going to look like in the future whilst they're making decisions now, right? But if both parties there in the US, they're roughly going to do the same thing, aren't they? They're going to have to stimulate the economy because of COVID. The markets always seem to move up and follow the same sort of pattern, no matter who's in power. So why then ask for certainty of knowing who's in power when they kind of make the same decisions, don't they?
At the end of the day, but again, I think it's about, I mean, there are, definitely some differences, but as long as those differences are within a range,
right,
then people can live with them. But when there's the potential for, an extreme outcome, that people aren't thinking about, then, that's what, the professional investors who are managing, tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, get nervous and say, okay, I'm going to flatten my book so that I'm not really exposed one way or the other if one of these extreme events, might happen. So, again, I on my personal, political spectrum, I think it would be great if the U.S. had, the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives all Democratic for 4 years with Joe Biden as president. But there would be, again, a group of the, investor base that would just, blow their minds. And that was a possibility based on where the polls were going into the election. There was a statistical chance of something like that occurring. Again, the other extreme to it as part of that is that there'd be this anarchic, response from a bunch of Trump voters. And again, there was this based on what had already happened, with a kidnapping threat to one of the U.S. governors, which has not happened for decades. Again, the statistical chance of those happening forced the professional investors to kind of consider that in terms of, okay, we're going to take a little risk off the table here and just batten down the hatches. And then once we're on the other side of it, then I'm past the risk. I know what the risk is, and now I can move forward.
It's I'm kind of intrigued by what we've seen here in Europe on a few occasions. We've seen here even in the UK in the last decade, is where you've got a scenario where the results go in a way such that they cancel each other out. There's the inability to make decisions or inability to get those decisions, through the Senate and through the House. That can be problematic. Sorry to make this a political conversation, but I'm just trying to understand the North American market.
Oh no, and that's the true. I mean, again, the fact that you've got each of the branches of government, in different parties, and it's been increasingly difficult to get really any sort of significant legislative change through. Just again, sort of helps reinforce the status quo, and people go, oh, okay, away we go. I mean, I think what the trade-off is. If it's Joe Biden, you'll see a more sort of stricter COVID response, but you'll likely see a bigger stimulus package, right? So again, those will likely offset. If Trump ends up winning, then it's going to be the same, COVID response we've seen to date. Probably see more tax cuts, which are better for other parts of the economy. And again, we'll end up within a range. So.
Interesting. I'm quite excited. In about 20 minutes time, I think we've got a big announcement coming out. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that does. Can Trump make a comeback? That's the question.
Exactly.
We'll know.
My view is Nevada basically, because the Fox News has already called Arizona and showing that Trump's six electoral house votes away, that if Nevada would be blamed for giving the election to Joe Biden. So the Republican administration there does not want to be seen to be, doing that.
Right.
Both at a personal level and at a, at a political level. So we'll see. Well, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen as well.
That could actually be a thing. That could actually be bizarre to think about, but that could be a thing. Personal gain. Right. Let's talk about the old triangle. We always talk about the triumvirate, our favorite triumvirate. How are things?
Yeah. So every week, and we're going to be talking about this, and it's going to start to get exciting as we move through into November and December. So it's about, ore availability from the Philippines and related ore prices to there. It's basically NPI production and exports from there into China. And then it's, stainless steel prices and Chinese demand as that third leg. So, the issue is kind of, the triangle's kind of staying sort of steady as she goes. Stainless prices haven't gone up at all. You're starting to see stainless inventories creep up a little bit, which is going to, not allow any price increases to happen. Given where ore prices have already run up, and we've talked about how much they've run up already, most of the stainless industries isn't making much money making 300 series stainless steel. So again, they don't have an incentive to increase production, which in turn would, increase nickel demand. I think we're going to have to wait to see. We've had these big typhoons go through the Philippines. And, if we start to see ore inventories start to come down, that will be the part that, starts the next leg moving. But we haven't seen any signs. So right now the triangle showing, kind of steady as she goes, and even I would say a little downside risk over the next week or two, given the stainless inventory increase.
So why does it get more exciting at the end of the year?
Is again, we're into the rainy season for Philippines ore exports. So again, these laterite mines you're basically digging up dirt and putting it in a boat and shipping it to China. And so when it's monsoon season, that dirt gets very soggy and large trucks just don't operate very well in a lot of mud. So, in certain parts, it doesn't extend. Different parts of the Philippines have rainy season at different times of the year, but the major exporting areas, it's basically, October through February, March, where this starts to kick in. And again, it's not one of those things where, it's sunny today and it's tomorrow. It's sort of, you gradually move in, it gets more intense, and then you gradually move out again. So, we're on our way in. So far the exports in September and October, we're relatively high, but we'll see as we move into the rest of November, December, January. We'll start to see those come down, and definitely the weather has turned in the Philippines over the last few weeks.
Okay, well, talking of global sales, global EV sales numbers, not bad.
Yes. Yeah, no, there's this EV thematic because, again, viewers may have heard that, EV batteries use nickel and a lot of nickel. So, it was a record sales month, 345,000 by one of the sources reported in September, which was 90% year over year increases. Again, part of the year over year numbers are affected by the fact that the Chinese had lifted some subsidies in mid-June last year, which caused a whole sort of ripple through. So that's an artificially high number. But, again, what it really emphasizes is that, one of the themes coming out of COVID in terms of the recovery and how this recovery is structured is that, people are going to use this as an opportunity to kind of reposition their economies, redirect, where the economy is headed. So, the fact that you're seeing this strong response in EV sales, as people decide to buy, I'm going to buy a new car and I'm going to make it now an EV vehicle, is great. And it was, sales in China were also up, not to a record number, but they bounced back pretty well. And then again, we're starting to see some of that physical follow through happen in the market. So I think we talked a few weeks ago about nickel sulfate prices having come back up quite a bit. We've seen sulfate trading at a premium again to nickel metal. And what was encouraging is there's one form of nickel. It's nickel briquette. It's basically a very fine nickel powder that's been compressed, into a literally like a barbecue charcoal briquette. But because it's made up of a bunch of fine particles, if you want to make nickel dissolve something to make nickel sulfate, it's the preferred feed. So, that product, because the nickel sulfate market was in a bit of turmoil in China for a while, is that discount has now disappeared and it's trading at flat. So, again, I think that's a good sign that the, sort of rebound in EVs is making its way right through the supply chain, and that should bode well for, nickel sulfate demand and nickel sulfate prices in China, through the remainder of the year. Yeah,
I mean, we had Howard Klein on. He's a lithium market commentator, and he was talking about Shanghai are going to restrict the cars that come into Shanghai to those which have Shanghai plates. And he felt that could be another one, could account for another 1.3 million car sales in China if they bring that in, because apparently they're going to bring it in hard, Chinese style. This is not happening. No. So it's kind of interesting. What that's the Chinese reaction, and we're seeing there's still these huge subsidies across Europe for electric vehicles. It's very interesting times indeed. When you kind of backtrack that and say, well, okay, how do I find enough of the different commodities needed to produce these cars, to produce these batteries, and given the timelines being set, the goals and targets being set by the countries within these ecosystems, are we going to be able to get things moving quickly enough?
Well, again, I think that's a great point, and I think the key thing here is you can sort of look at individual policy decisions and react to those individual policy decisions, but the safer way to invest over the long term is where is the overall trend going? And so again, China needs clean air. The only way it's going to get clean air is to get rid of more internal combustion engines off of the road. So yes, they removed subsidies just over a year ago. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to have, lots and lots of EV sales to reduce the pollution in the major cities. So, now you're seeing, again, these license plate restrictions. And again, in China, they enforce them. And so, those will cause, some additional EV sales to be generated for sure there. So, again, both of those decisions don't really mean whether that goal has changed very much. The Chinese government put out sort of the sort of guidelines for their next 5-year plan, and again, had some very specific, EV goals that they wanted to try and achieve over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So, those recommendations get into a more comprehensive set of policy measures. But, again, it was very clear that, the direction that, China's headed. So, and again, these individual numbers are nice, but they are, again, just supportive of what that overall trend is. So
absolutely. And we talk China, talk Europe, talk US, whichever ecosystem you want to, analyze. But I was intrigued by the policy decisions that are being made appearing to be disconnected. Is another way of asking what I just asked, but there's a disconnect there. Do the people in power, do the policymakers know enough about the supply chain to be able to put timelines on these things, or are they doing enough to support the players in the supply chain to be able to meet these deadlines?
Oh God, no. I mean, they're basically, their policy, they have a policy objective that they would like to achieve, again, which is more EVs on the road by a certain time. And again, not just cars, buses, trucks, a bunch of other vehicles, right? So, but the repercussions of that on the overall supply chain, I think they'll kind of, great Chinese enterprises or, great enterprises in Europe and the US will go forth and find whatever materials are required to, deliver the goals that we would like to see. So, do not believe there's any significant forward thinking in any government policy decisions.
Ever. That's just general good advice.
Ever. Yes. Yeah.
Wow. No, but to be serious, it's indicative of a mood and change. And there usually is a lot of money associated with this stuff. It's just slightly discombobulated in terms of being joined up thinking. But I think that the mood of the nation, certainly in Europe, is that they want significant increased sales of EV, and that's good for the nickels and the lithiums and the cobalts or whichever battery is servicing whichever type of vehicle and use case. That's all good news. What the thing which is coming at, the question is being asked in a lot of this is the infrastructure required. So we've talked about the automotive industry having their infrastructure in place and they're building these big ecosystems and so forth, but charging stations, servicing, all of these things, again, they take time, and people are, I guess, again, talk about certainty around political decision making. People are waiting for a bit more certainty around the timing of this, because you can't go early on that stuff, because that's quick. That's quick to implement. It's quick to put in, on the servicing side. But charging points, a little bit more planning required. So, do you think the governments again need to just give a little bit more guidance?
Oh, big time for sure. I mean, to be able to make some of the infrastructure decisions now, that is more of an issue in Europe, where there's a lot fewer people living in large detached homes. In North America, where lots of people, a higher proportion of the population live in detached houses. plugging into your house is great. It makes it very easy to charge up every night. But in places where that's impossible, if it's street parking and so forth, that's much more challenging. So yeah, no, again, I would love for the industry to give, I've talked about before, a lot more guidance in terms of, where they really think this is going. So people have the time to be able to build the supply chain of the materials that are going to be required. And then, to your point there, in terms of the infrastructure that's going to be required to support some of these things. But, as always, it'll end up, generally being probably a bit of a mad scramble. But again, as an investor, if you know that that's the way that's going to go, if you can position yourself in front of that mad scramble, that's one of those times where you can create some, massive outsized opportunities as people all of a sudden rush in and go, hey, this is for real. They are going to need to build all of these things. And there's only 4 companies that can do it. And, and away you go. So
I think that's right. And I think people like coming into investing in mining, because we're seeing all of these generalist investors coming into mining, which is exciting. Yep. It's great. It means there's a bit more money coming in, not just retail, but I'm talking about funds as well. And even, people who you haven't been in this space for all coming back to. So that's all really good news. But there's a lack of knowledge and understanding there. So all of this kind of this macro data and accumulating and assimilating it and understanding and interpreting it and then coming up with an opinion around timing, that's the key to all of this. So, anyone watching this is all good stuff. This is all good stuff. I appreciate it. We got to talk about this. Okay, the world of HPal, my favorite topic, yes. HPal. So New Caledonia.
Yes.
Been a little bit of process going on there.
Oh, yes.
Tell us the story. Build a picture.
Yes, the past week, I think, has done a very good job of highlighting, a bunch of the key issues with HPal. Again, for, people who are relatively new to nickel, it was in the fall of 2019 where, a bunch of major Chinese players said, oh, hey, look, we've built a huge amount of nickel pig iron production in Indonesia. We're just going to do the same thing in HPal, and they'll be operating by late 2020 or by early 2020 because we build everything that quickly. Again, hydrometallurgy and HPal processes in nickel have been fraught with, there have been decades worth of spectacular failures across multiple levels. And it comes down to there's basically, 3 things that make HPal challenging. One is just the nature of where these deposits are found. They tend to be in there are more politically challenging jurisdictions than less political challenging jurisdictions. So, that's one dimension that you have to make sure you get right. The second thing is the nature of these deposits, can be highly variable. Again, you're digging out soggy dirt that has been, morphed into soil containing enriched amounts of nickel and cobalt over a long period of time. And again, you can drill a hole here and drill a hole here, and you get 2 results. But unlike hard rock mining, where, generally geologically you can understand that, okay, if I get the same number in both, there's a pretty good chance I've got the same thing in between. It's absolutely meaningless most of the time in a laterite type deposit. The third thing is, again, these are really complicated flow sheets. Pyrometallurgy, which is how you make nickel pig iron, is basically it got started, 2,000 years ago when, people figured out if I dump a lump of this rock in the fire and catch the stuff that comes out, I get metal, copper, zinc, other metals. It's evolved since then. And I'm sure there's some metallurgists are going to be mad that, I'm taking their science down to that. But it's not really all that much more complicated than that at its core. When you get into hydrometallurgy, you've got a bunch of chemical conditions that you then have all of these recirculating loads that you're trying to keep into balance with a highly variable feed that you're starting out with. So, the ramp up curve for these operations has been, several years before, once they've got going to get started. So, so politics, process, and the ore itself are all challenging. So in terms of politics, New Caledonia has been, endowed with some of the highest grade and best laterite resources. That's where the nickel industry got started back in the 1880s with some super high grade laterite ore. that got going at that point in time before they discovered Sudbury. But politically, it's just a really challenging jurisdiction. So Vale has finally said they're going to sell Goro. Well, there's been street protests around the sale of this mine to a group that's been led by Trafigura with some local partners. And again, getting political consensus about how something should move forward in that jurisdiction is really challenging. So, that makes operating a big mine and process plant difficult. The other news this week is, First Quantum restarted the Ravensthorpe mine. They had shut it down. This is an HPal plant. BHP built it for $2 billion, walked away because they couldn't make any money off of it. First Quantum picked it up for a few $100 million, successfully restarted it, but they've now moved to a new ore body. And again, because of this reason of, it's really difficult to understand, it just takes a lot of drilling to understand the sort of the variability and nuances of a particular deposit. They've now moved to a new deposit, and production is getting, hammered because they're getting, all of this variability in the ore that they weren't expecting. And they're now looking for a partner. And again, First Quantum is one of the best operators in the mining industry. That group has built more large mines, in the past 15 years than pretty much anybody. So, it's not like they have a lot of engineering talent and they've found HPal challenging, and then the last piece of it is in Indonesia, there's 3 main HPal plants going forward. Again, one was supposed to start this quarter. It's now been pushed out to the spring of 2021. They're claiming they're going to ramp up in 6 months, to produce 30 or 35,000 tons of nickel a year, and they still don't have a permit for their tailings. So, we will see how that progresses. But again, they've already been delayed quite a bit, and I think you're going to see, sort of additional delays as they get going here. They will figure it out, and we need it. It's one of the only places we can get nickel units. So, I hope they figure HPal out. But again, in terms of what it will end up costing to operate, costing to build, and the ramp up, will likely be much higher on all 3 fronts than they were initially indicating a couple of years ago. It's
interesting to me that the same mistakes keep getting made. I mean, year over year over year. Are there not that many people who know how to do a HPal project properly? Is that the fundamental problem here?
I think the fundamental problem is it's just an inherently challenging process to make work. Sherritt was involved in the Mbatavi project. They ran Moa Bay in Cuba for years, and so they went to Mbatavi, and again that's a project that never reached nameplate capacity. Struggled to get to 70 to 80%. They had deep pocket partners in Asia, again, who have had successful projects in other metals and other processes, and really did struggle to find a way to make it work. So it's an inherently challenging processing route. And again, other than Sumitomo Metal Mining, no one else has been able to do it in a cheap, easy fashion at this point.
Okay. But we need it all. So that's the good news. The nickel story is positive, but you've got to make it economic too.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark, brilliant. Thank you very much for this week's rundown on the world of nickel. As ever, there's always lots to talk about, right? Exciting times. Exactly. Exciting times.
Yes, it is. And it's 1 minute away from the Nevada results. So,
which case, I'm going to let you go. I know you enjoy this as much as I do. So I'm going to go let you revel in that commentary. It won't be on time. And we'll see you next week.
And hopefully we'll find out who the president is by next week. Yep.
Maybe.
Exactly.